Consider a mining company which has performed open pit mining in some previously unexplored area. Does the company have a moral obligation to restore the landform and surface ecology? And what is the value of a humanly restored environment compared with the originally natural environment? Many people think that it is normally wrong for human beings to pollute and destroy parts of the natural environment and to consume a huge proportion of the planet's natural resources. If that is wrong, is it simply because a sustainable environment is essential to human existence and well being? Or is such behavior also wrong because the natural environment and its various contents have certain values in their own right, so that these values ought to be respected and protected in any case? These are among the questions investigated by environmental ethics. Some of them are specific questions faced by individuals in particular circumstances, while others are more global questions faced by groups and communities. Yet others are more abstract questions concerning the value and moral standing of the natural environment and its non-human components. In the literature on environmental ethics is a distinction between instrumental value and intrinsic value is of considerable importance. The former is the value of things as means to further some other ends, whereas the latter is the value of things as ends in themselves, regardless of whether they are also useful as means to other ends. For instance, certain fruits have instrumental value for bats who feed on them, since feeding on the fruits is a mean to survival for the bats. However, it is not widely agreed that fruits have values as ends in themselves. We can likewise think of an open person who teaches others have instrumental value for those who want to acquire knowledge, yet in addition to any other such value, it is normally said that a person has interesting value in their own right independently of their prospects for serving the ends of others. For another example, a certain wild plant may have instrumental value because it provides the ingredients for more medicine or as an aesthetic object for human observers. But if the plant also has some value in itself independently of prospects for furthering some other ends such as human health or the pleasure from aesthetic experience, the plant also have intrinsic value. Because intrinsic value is which is good as an end itself. It is commonly agreed that someone's possession in instinctive value generates a prima facie direct normal duty on the part of moral agents to protect it, or at least refrain from damaging it. Many traditional Western ethical philosophers' perspectives are, however, anthropic or human centered in that either they assign instinctive value to human beings alone, called anthropic in strong senses, or they assign significantly greater amount instinctive value to human beings than any non-human things, such as the protection or promotion of human interests or well-being at the same expense of non-human things turns out to be nearly also justified. For example, Aristotle apparently maintains the nature has made all this specifically for the sake of the man. Such perspective or teleological thinking may encourage the belief that the value of non-human being things in nature is merely instrumental. It is difficult to anthropomorphic positions to articulate what is wrong with the cruel treatment for non-human animals. Expect to extent that such treatment may lead to bad consequences for human beings. Immanuel Kant, for instance, suggested that cruelty towards a dog might encourage a person to develop a character which would be decentralized to cruelty towards humans. From that standpoint, cruelty towards non-human animals would be instrumentally rather than intrinsically wrong. Likewise, Anthropologists often recognizes some instinctive wrongness of anthropogenic environmental devastations. Such destruction might damage the well-being of human beings now and in the future. Since our very existence and well-being is essentially dependent on a sustainable environment, this argument was made in the previous century and seems subsequently to have gathered wide public support. When the environmental ethics emerged as a new sub-discipline of philosophy in the early 1970s, it did so by posing challenges to traditional anthropocentrism. In the first place, it questioned the assumed moral superiority of human beings to members of other species on the earth. In the second place, it investigated the possibility of rational arguments for assigning instinct value to the natural environment and non human contents. It should be noted, however, that some theorists working in the field see no to develop new non anthropocentric theories. Instead, they advocate what may be called enlightened anthropocentrism. Briefly, this is the view that all the moral duties we have towards the environment are derivated from our direct duties to its human inhabitants. The practical purpose of environmental ethics, the maintain, is provide moral grounders for special policies aimed at protecting the Earth's environment and remedying environmental degradation. Enlightened anthropocentrism, they argue, is sufficient for practical purpose. Immanuel Kant, for instance, suggests that cruelty towards a dog might encourage a person to develop a character which would be decentralized to cruelty towards humans. From this standpoint, cruelty towards non human animals would be instrumental rather than instinctively wrong. Likewise, anthropocentrism often recognizes that non-instinct wrongness of anthropogenic environment devastation. Such destruction might damage the well-being of beings now and in the future. Since our very existence and well-being essentially depends on a sustainable environment, the argument was made in previous century and seems subsequently to have generated wide public support. When environmental ethics emerged as sub-discipline of philosophy in the early 17th, it did so by posting a challenge to traditional anthropocentrism. In the first place, it questioned the assumed moral superiority of human beings to members of other species on Earth. In the second place, it investigated the possibility of rational arguments for assigning instinctive value to the natural environment and non-human contents. It should be noted. However, some theorists working on the field see no need to develop new non-anthropocentric theories. Instead, they advise what may be called a lightened anthropocentrism called prudential. Briefly, this is the view that all moral duties we have towards the environment are derived from our direct duties to its human inhabitants. The principal purpose of environmental ethics, the maintain, is to provide more ground for the social ethics aimed at the protecting the Earth's environment and remedying environmental degradation. Enlightened anthropocentrism, they argue, is significant that part the practical purpose and perhaps even more in terms of policymaking, that non-anthropogenic theories that given the theoretical burden on the latter to provide sound arguments is radical. View that the non-human environment has instinct value. Furthermore, some prudential anthropocentrism may hold that what might be called anthropocentrism, which says that we have a lighter level anthropocentric reason to be non-anthropocentric in the way to-day thinking. Suppose that a day-to-day environment which was likely to a human being which all human depends. This world would provide a reason for encouraging non-anthropocentric thinking. even to those who find the idea on non-independent instincts well to hard swallow. In order for such study to effectively, one may need to hide one's cynical anthropocentrism for others, and even from oneself. The position can be structurally compared to indirect form of consequentialism and maybe attract parallel circumstances. That the late 20th century faced a human population explosion as the part of serious environmental crisis. Among the accessible work that drew attention to a sense of crisis was Rachel Carson's Siren Spring, which considered of a number of essays earlier published in the New York Magazine, detailing now practices such as DDT, aldrin, and daldrin. Concentrated to the food web. Commercial farming practices using same chemicals to maximize the crop yield and profits. Carson speculates are capable of impacting simultaneously on environmental and public health. Their use, she claims, uh, can have the side effects of killing or other living things and causing human disease waste. Carson correctly fears that over the uh, precious use that may lead to increase in some resistance instinct species. The intensification of agricultural land, clarifying massive use of neonicotinoids had subsequently contributed to a situation in which, according to some reviews, nearly half of insect species are threatened with extinction. And compare further, Slugis and Page Coleman declares that insects population not only threaten polluted in plant of species, but may also are responsible for huge declines in some bird populations and appear to go hand in hand with cascading extinction across ecosystem worldwide. In a much cited essay or on the historical roots of environmental crisis, historian Lynn White argued that the main stance of Judeo-Christian thinking about they had to encourage the overexploitation of nature by maintaining the superiority of humans all over the forms of life on the earth, and by depicting all the nature as created for the use of humans. White's thesis was widely discussing in theology, history, and has been subjected to some sociological testing as well as being regularly discussed by philosophers. Centered to the rotation rate for his thesis were works on the church fathers and Bible itself, supporting the anthropocentric perspective that humans are the only things on the earth that matters themselves. Consequently, they may utilize and consume everything else to their advantage without injustice. Modern Western science itself, while argued that cast of the matrix of Christian theology as so that it too inherited the Orthodox Christians' arrogance toward nature. Clearly, without technology and science, the environmental extreme to which we are now exposed would properly be realized. The point of White's thesis, however, is that given the modern form of science and technology, Judean Christianity itself provides the original deep seated drive to unlimited exploration of nature. Nevertheless, White argued that the some minority traditions of within Christianity might provide an antidote to the arrogance of a mainstream tradition steeped into anthropocentrism. This sentiment is echoed in the later Christian writings or on attitudes of nature. And at the same time, the Stanford ecologist Paul and he warned the population boom 1986 that growth of human population threatened the viability of planetary life support systems. The sense of environmental crisis simulated by those and other popular workers was intensified by NASA production and wide dissemination of particularly potent image of Earth from space taken at Christmas 1986 and featured in the Scientific American. in September 1970. Here, plain to see, we are living in a shining planet voyaging through space and shared by all the humanity, a precious vessel vulnerable to pollution and to the arrows of its own limited capabilities. In 1972, a team of researchers at MIT led by Donelia Meadows published the Limits to Growth study, a work that summed up in many ways in enraging concerns of the precise decade and sense of vulnerability triggered by the view of Earth from space. In the commentary to the study, the researchers wrote, "We affirm finally that any deliberate attempt to reach a rational and enduring state of equilibrium by planned measures rather than by chance of catastrophe by must ultimately be founded on a basis change of values and goals at individuals, national and world levels." It was 1972. The call for a basic change of values in connection to the environment, interpreted in terms of either instrumental or instinctive values, reflected a needs to the development of environmental ethics in subdiscipline of philosophy, with the aim of facing up to the challenges of limit resources was fostered subsequently by studies by the growing human ecological footprint on the earth and by the exploration of planetary boundaries and the concept of cell operating space of humanity. The new field emerged almost simultaneously three countries, the United States, Australia, and Norway. In the first two of these countries, direction inspiration largely came from the earlier 20th century American literature of the environment. For instance, the Scottish Englishman John Foster Aldrich had advocated application and conversation of things natural, wild, and free. The concerns were motivated by a combination of ethical, atheistic responses to a nature as well as the rejection of worldly economic approaches to the value of natural objects. Also, see Cohen 1984 and Nash Leopold, a Sandy country, in particular advocated the adoption of land ethic. The land ethic community is basic concept of the ecology, but the land is loved and respected is an extension of ethics, Leopold said. However, Leopold himself provided some no systematic ethical theory or framework to support these ethical ideas concerning the environment. His views therefore pretended like a challenge and opportunity for moral theorists. Would ethical theories be advertised to justifies and interjection to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biosphere? The land ethic is sketched by Leopold attempting to extend our moral concern to cover the natural environment and its non-human constants. All drawn on explicitly by Austrian philosopher Richard Rowley. According to Rowley, the anthropocentrism embedded in the what we call the dominant Western view or the Western view supertheory is in effect human quantitavism. The view he argued is just a form of class quantitavism, which simply based on blind classes, voluntary prejudice, and unjustifiably discriminates ascend to those outside privileged classes, echoing the plot of popular movie some 3 years earlier. Rowley speculates in his Last Man arguments about hypothetical situation in the which the last person surviving the world catastrophe acts to ensure that the elimination of all the living things, and the last people set about destroying forests and ecosystem after the demise. From the human contextualistic perspective, the last person would nothing normally wrong, since his or her destructively act questions would not cause any damage in the interest and well-being of humans, who would by then have disappeared. Nevertheless, Rauti points out that there moral institutions that imagine that last word would be morally wrong. An explanation for this judgment, he argues that those non-human objects in the environment whose destruction ensured by the last person or last people have instinctive value. A kind of value independent of this usefulness for humans from this critique. Rosely conclude that the main approaches in this traditional Western moral thinking were unable to allow the recognition that natural things have instinct value and the traditional required overwhelm of a significant kind. Therefore, the idea said land as a whole in an object of a moral concern also simulated writers to argue for the certain moral obligation towards ecological wholes, such as species, communities, and ecosystems. Not just their individual constitutions, the US based theological and environmental philosophers Holmes Free, for instance, argued that the species protection was a moral duty. It would be wrong, he maintained, to eliminate a rare butterfly species simply to increase the monetary value of the specimens already held by collectors. Like Rauter's last man arguments, Goldstone's experiment is meant to draw attention to a kinder action to seamlessly normally devious and yet not to rule or condemned by traditional anthropology ethical views. Species, Rawlson went on argue instantly valuable are the usually more valuable than individual specimens. Since the loss of a species or in the loss of a genetic possibilities and deliberate destruction of a species would show disrespect for very biological processes which make possible to emerge of individual living things. Natural processes deserve respect, according to Roston's religious perspective, because they constitute a nature which itself intrinsically valuable. Meanwhile, the work for Christopher Stone of the law at the University of Southern California have become widely discussed. Stone proposes that the trees and the other objects should have at least the same standing in law as corporations. The suggestion was inspired by a particular case in which Sierra Club has mounted a challenge against the permit granted in the US Forest Service to Walt Disney Enterprises for service preventory to development of the Inner King Valley, which was at the time a relevantly remote game refuge, but not designed as a national park or protected wilderness areas. This Disney proposal was to develop a major resort complex serving 14,000 visitors daily to be accessed by a purpose-built highway to Sequoia National Park. The Sierra Club, as a body with a general concern for wilderness conversations, challenged the development on the grounds the valley should be kept in its original states for its own sake. Stone responded that if trees, forests, and mountains could be given standing in the law, then they could be represented in their own rights in the courts by the groups such as Sierra Club. Moreover, like any other legal person, these natural things could be become beneficiaries for comparisons if it could be shown in a way they are suffered compensably injured through human activity. When a case went to the US Supreme Court, it determined by a narrow majority that in the Syria Club did not meet the condition for a beginning case for the court. For the club is unable to unwilling to prove the likelihood of the injury for the interest of the club or its members. In dissenting minority judgments, however, Justice Douglas Blackham Penman mentioned that Stone's argument, his proposal to give legal standing to natural things, he said, would allow conversational interest, community needs, and business interests to be presented, debated, and settled in the court. Stowe's work was later cited in the successful argument that grant personhood to rivers and other natural features various parts to the world. In some other cases, Stone's argument, along with those NAs, have said that provide analogs to indigenous meaning of instinct value of the land and the interconnections of surrounding, such as understanding with human actions and ancestral spirituality. Similar suggestions have also made out about Lippert's work, but such claims need to be interpreted with caution. Reacting to Stone's proposal, Joy Finberg raised a serious problem. Only items that have been interest, Finberg argued that can be regarded as having legal standing and like otherwise moral standing. For it interests which are capable of being represented in legal proceedings and moral debates. The same point would also seem to apply political debates. For instance, the movement for animal liberation, which also emerged slowly in 1970s. Can that be thought of a political movement aimed at representing the previously neglected interest of some animals? Granted that some animals have interested that can be represented in this way, would it make sense to speak of trees, forests, rivers, persons, or caminers as having interest in morality to live in kind? This issue was also wholly consequented in the years of followed. Meanwhile, John Passmore argued that, like White and the Judeo-Christian tradition of thought about nature, despite being predominantly dystopic, contained researches of regarding humans as wetlands or perfecters of God's creation. Skeptical of the prospects of any radically new ethic, Passmore cautioned that traditions of thought could not be or abruptly overwhelmed. Any changes in attitudes to our natural surroundings which stood in the chances of widespread acceptance, he argued, would have to resonate have to some continuities with very traditional which had legitimized our destruction practices. In some, then Leonard's like ethics, the historical analysis of White and Passmore, the pioneering work of Routley, Stone, and Robertson are the warnings of scientists had done by the late 1970s focused on the attention of philosophers and political theorists firmly on the environment. The confluence of ethical, political, legal debates about the environment, the emergence of philosophers to underpin animal rights activists, the puzzle over whether an environmental ethics would be something new rather than a modification of extension of existing ethical theories were reflected in wisdom, social and political movements. The rise of environmental or green parties are in Europe in the 1980s were accomplished by the almost immediate decision between groups known as realists versus fundamentalists. The realists stood for reform environmentalism, working with businesses and government to soften the impact of pollution and resource depletion, especially on the fragile ecosystem or damaged species. The fundies argued that the radical changes, the setting of stranding new priorities, and even the overflow of capitalism and liberal individualism were taken as the major ideology cause of anthropogenic environmental devastation. It is not clear, however, the collectivist or communist countries do particularly well in the terms of their environmental record at the same time. The rise of environmental authoritarianism is non-democratic countries appears to show that liberal democracies may have not been monopolied on effective action to support sustainability and biodiversity. Writers have also tried to make sense of why so much misinformation about climate change and other catastrophic so is widespread. As humanity faces the uncertain future of declining biodiversity and increasing extreme weather events driven by escalating predatory ratings, causing suffering and alienation for humans and non-humans alike, the moral challenges listed at the start of this century seem more pleasant than ever.